Because I kind of believe that you kind of just, whatever your moral system is kind of subjective in a lot of ways. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? I don't think that necessarily one is the right way. You know what I mean? It just depends on what your what scale you're using, you know. And you don't have to use the same scale for what is good or bad. I mean, there's no necessary, like there's no objective morality. So I just kind of choose that I value, you know, positive outcomes and people um progressing and having the most positive experiences as well as progressing society and technology and things like that. That's kind of like the gist of what I value.
So is this more like personal values then, not societal values? Or
What's the difference?
I would say personal values are more for your own self and your those are that are close to you. And then societal values are like do not murder, do not steal, etc. So when you say that there's a lack of an objective morality, right? What does this mean? Do we need a government? Do we need like all these social support programs to like because they're running on like their idea of an objective morality, right? Like helping others, etc. So like how can you say it's all subjective?
Well, I think that the governments just kind of have to do their best to create the most stable, positive environment for progression and economy and stuff like that.
But that's very broad. You have to like now dissect that. What does it mean by positive? What does it mean by stable? And it goes on and on and on. It gets deeper and deeper and deeper. So how can you really have a subjective approach here?
What do you mean by how can you have a subjective approach?
So you said morality was like kind of subjective, right? It's like personal, what you think is right, right?
Mm-hmm.
But how is this if everybody like assumes this, like it's all subjective and according to their own values, then what are we gonna have as the values of the whole collective?
Well, this is what I mean, where it depends on what like scale you're using. The government's using a different scale. They want like they probably want the least amount of harm to individuals and the most amount of they want to have the strongest economy that they can have for the most part. At least America does. And you know, they it's just like if you look at the Constitution and stuff, you can kind of see the foundations for what they're valuing, you know, and what everything's built off of, which is a little bit different than like what you're calling a personal, like moral system.
So how do you get from the values of the individual to the values of the whole group? How do you like do that? Are you taking votes or are you like what is going on here?
Well, I mean, the way that we're doing it is, I mean, trying to vote, but I mean, this is just the way that the US's government is set up is that you vote representatives in that are going to have, you know, certain values and stuff. But I mean, the government talk is a bit complicated. I mean, I don't really
Yeah,
know.
yeah, because I know like many philosophers like always base their whole political philosophy off of ethics. Like that's where it derives from. So if you want to like have a good value system for people, then that's inevitably going to involve political philosophy. So like, what's your whole um,
'Cause
hierarchy of values? That's sort of like a politics thing, you know?
I haven't really thought too much about connecting my personal values to the values of like and plugging it into like a government system because I think
So
laws are very complicated and sometimes you can make a law and it's counterproductive. So it's very complicated and I think above my head.
okay, yeah. So we're talking about just personal values then, like how we go through life, like what we always take for
Yeah,
as right.
because like I said, like laws and stuff, it's so hard. And it's like I said, a law can be counterproductive. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's kind of more complicated than trying to make whatever's best happen based on your values because you can make a law that would technically be correct in the value system, but has an opposite effect to society. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
making drugs illegal because you don't want people to do drugs, but then that creates like an underground market, you know what I mean? And
Yeah.
blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. It all has these pros and cons, and it's really
Yeah.
hard to predict like the outcome. Sort of where even chaos theory says like everything you do, like one thing will have multiple effects. You know, it's always a snowball effect, and it's hard to predict the outcome of implementing certain procedures. You know,
Yeah.
so as far as personal values are concerned, I would say I value pursuit of happiness. I value knowledge. I value family, friends. Like, um, yeah, that's pretty much what I would say I value. It's kind of simple way. Yeah. Also, exercise, like eating the right things. You know, you always gotta keep track of that, and just being respectful towards others. I mean, I like to be treated with respect, and the way I do that is by treating others with respect. So a lot of things go both ways, you know.
Yeah. It just, I think one of the problems is that I find is that, um, like I have this sense of what's best and how people should act, but then also I want diversity. And maybe that diversity also could factor in the way of it could add to the progression and knowledge, but if you got rid of it completely, we're kind of losing some knowledge that would come from the diversity.
I sort of see what you're saying. So it's sort of like experimenting with
Sure.
different.
Like you're always able to learn lessons from these other like groups and philosophies and things.
So what do you think what approach do you think we need to take here to assess what policies are best to implement? Do you think we need to take a political approach, an economic approach, psychological approach? Like, how are you gonna attack this whole thing?
Well, right now, I think the state of things right now, we need to focus more on psychological things because we're focused way too much on, laws and more, I don't know, like concrete things, you know?
Do you think at times we can be too much like focusing on the psychological when everybody like focuses on what mental illness they have or like everybody's depressed?
Yeah,
What if
but
they're
the problem is that you hear about this a lot and people complaining about it a lot, but nobody's actually wanting to take steps towards improving anything. They just want to talk about it like, oh, I have this mental illness. Let's talk about trying to improve things and trying to improve the system in a way that will improve the psychological aspect instead of worrying about improving the system to get a certain outcome. Let's worry about improving the psychological outcome, and maybe that could help improve the other outcomes that we want.
yeah, and for me it always goes both ways. So the psychological always influences the cultural, the governmental, whatever. And that in turn the societal influences the psychological. So it's a whole like
Yeah.
it's very complex, and I'm honestly surprised at like how these people can figure out like what's the best way to do things. I mean, there's not really one right way. It's just really hard to really analyze, you know.
Yeah, I just feel like we're not, at least the government's not very focused on the psychological right now, you know?
Yeah, and I think it's been a recent like phenomenon where we focus more on not just the concrete, but actually the subjective, and like how our minds really make reality. Like ever since Kant, the philosopher Immanuel Kant, like said, we can't know the outside world without knowing like what's going on in our subjective world. Um, we've been focusing more on the subject rather than the object. So yeah. Um,
Yeah,
what was I saying? Yeah, it's very complex and
yeah.
nuanced.
I think a good example of like the way that the systems are handling things is like the big pharma, the way that
Yeah,
we just kind of throw medicine to solve problems right now in like the mental
yeah,
health side of
yes,
things. And we're not really trying to focus on bettering people's lives. Um, we're trying to better people's lives by using medication instead of trying to change habits and change their life. And hopefully it would change their mental aspect naturally. Instead, we're trying to use, drugs and chemicals and stuff to change our brain chemistry.
yeah. It's sort of like focusing just on the symptoms, like relieving the symptoms, and not the actual disease here. So
Sure.
yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, you said it right.
Yeah, and I feel like that's the way that everything is. Like that's the way that the laws are made and everything. I mean, it's like with the abortion thing. Most people would agree that we probably shouldn't be that abortion's probably not a good thing, but there's a good chunk of people that believe that it's for the betterment of society and stuff, so it's worth it, right? And instead of fighting between whether it should be legal or not, we should also be trying to improve the things that creates the need for abortion.
Yes, yes, agree. Like it's like all the economic influences, right? It's also an education issue.
Yeah, I mean,
It's so many things going on here. Yeah.
there's like it's just crazy how many. Yeah, I mean, one of the main problems is younger people, people that are like 16 to like 25 having, not really being knowledgeable and just having sex and not really thinking about the consequences. And then they end up getting pregnant. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I mean, it's understandable, but it's also like kind of a cultural thing, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's not taken very seriously. And I mean,
Yeah.
it's easy to understand why, children, wouldn't understand and would be kind of immature about it. But then we should try to help them understand, you know?
Yeah. Honestly, with these complex issues, you got to think about human civilization itself. Like we just like the information age has occurred like what 50 years ago. Like we've only had these technologies for like 1,000 years, and to say that we can even be able to conceive these complex issues in their totality at this moment, that's kind of naive to say, because we're we've just begun as a human race, like our whole um I don't know, I don't know how to say it, but we're just so new to the earth. Like of course we don't have it figured out. It's just there's so many
Yeah.
things going on, so many factors. Like you got biological factors, you got psychological, sociological, political, etc. It all goes in and intersects in all these ways. So like to say we've got a grasp on it, it's
Yeah.
very
That's one thing that frustrates me when talking to a lot of people or just listening to a lot of people is a lot of them are just set in this way of, oh, this is the right way, or this is the way things should be, or oh, we can understand this stuff if we just, like the one case of just, oh, all we gotta do is look at the statistics. We can figure this out objectively. It's like, no, a lot of these things, we don't have all the variables, we don't know all the factors, and people jump to conclusions too often and get too set in certain ideas.
yes, yes, and that's most people, and I just think
Sure.
that's naive. Um, Yeah, it's a whole issue of complexity. And at that point, you know what you need? You need philosophy, because philosophy really underpins all these disciplines and tells you how they intersect exactly. So you really need like philosophy to aid in your knowledge of these factors, or else you're just gonna get lost in all these variables and you don't know like what to do about it, you know.
Yeah.
Like people have to be okay with understanding that this world is not black and white. It's very gray and murky. And we're only trying to understand it with our limited abilities, you know.
Yeah. I feel like this conversation has been very everywhere.
Well, that's kind of the issue with all these issues. You know, it's just so many things going on at once. Like, how do you really grasp it? You know, so
And
like it all connects together. You know, everything's connected.
yeah. If you liked this video, please consider liking and subscribing for more content. And feel free to leave a comment down below.